New York, November of 2025. The wind comes in from the river like it has a grudge, slicing through concrete alleys and glass towers, and for once it doesn't feel poetic. It feels like a warning. People always think the terrifying part of collapse is money running out. But the truth is uglier. The city doesn't go quiet because it's empty. It goes quiet because everyone is holding their breath, waiting for the next lie to fail. From the 80th floor of One World Trade Center, you can still see that shimmering illusion everyone sells. Billboards glow. Tech dreams float above the street like balloons that never deflate. AI. Metaverse. Space tourism. The ads look confident, like the future is already paid for. But if you lower your eyes and zoom in on the ground level reality, on the cracked corridors, the overcrowded apartments in Queens, the narrow blocks where people learn to be quiet because noise costs money, you see the other half of the story. A financial engine still runs, sure. Banks still report profits. Investors still collect their bonuses. The system isn't collapsing from lack of resources. It's shaking from something worse than scarcity. It's shaking because the working people stopped behaving like furniture. And that's where Zohran Mamdani comes in. Not as a superhero, not as a saint, as a consequence. A working class counterattack with a pulse. A man who used to advise families on how to fight home seizures, and now sits in the seat they built for someone else. You think politics is something that happens in rooms with microphones. You're wrong. Politics is what happens when suffering becomes organized. Welcome to the hidden self, where I tell you what society won't. The uncomfortable mechanisms, the patterns people deny even when the evidence is on their doorstep. Today, we're going to dissect why a man like Mamdani becomes inevitable when an economy stops needing humans, and why the real danger isn't his policies. It's what they reveal about you, because if you're honest, you're not only watching this story, you're sensing your own fear of being powerless, and you're wondering how to reclaim control before it slips away. Let's start with the first uncomfortable truth. In 2025, the myth of meritocracy got murdered in broad daylight. Not with a speech, not with a scandal, with efficiency. A lot of people can't admit this, but their careers were always built on a bargain they never signed. Work would protect them from randomness. You learn a skill, you climb, you earn stability. You tell yourself that if you do things right, the system will reward you. Then AI and automation didn't change jobs the way people said they would. They shredded categories. They erased roles faster than workers could pivot. And the cruel part is how clean it looked from the outside. No dramatic collapse, no dramatic riots in boardrooms, just quiet layoffs one after another until you realize the floor under you has become unreliable. Imagine being a mid-level analyst who used to feel safe because you had knowledge. You don't just write emails, you make sense of numbers. You prepare reports, you advise. You think if machines can draft text, you still have judgment. Then one morning access changes. Your passwords stop working. Your tasks get rerouted to a new system. The company keeps the revenue story, but removes the labor. You're not fired because you failed. You're removed because the system no longer needs you to exist. And then the emotional hangover hits. Not just grief, humiliation. You start questioning your identity. Who am I if I'm not useful? Who am I if my intelligence can be replaced by software and a cheaper team abroad? People don't talk about this openly because it sounds melodramatic, but it's the core wound of modern life. When your job disappears, your self-respect often disappears with it. So when we talk about 950,000 layoffs, don't treat it like a statistic. It's a million tiny earthquakes. It's a mother in Brooklyn who suddenly can't cover groceries. It's a father who stops answering calls because every conversation ends with the same question. What are you going to do now? It's families who realize the old coping scripts don't work anymore. Save more. Budget better. Learn new software. Apply faster. Work harder. Those scripts assume the system rewards effort. But 2025 is where effort stopped being a reliable currency. And here's the hidden self mechanism. When your world becomes unpredictable, your mind looks for meaning. It either makes meaning by blaming yourself, or it makes meaning by blaming the system. Most people choose self-blame because it feels safer. If it's my fault, I can fix it. If it's the system, I'm trapped. So people quietly accept a slow death. They do 2 or 3 jobs. They sell their time in pieces like it's scraps. They sleep less and panic more. They use credit cards like oxygen tanks, and then they realize the tank is leaking. Now look at New York specifically. New York isn't just expensive, it's psychologically hostile. It punishes hope. The city runs on a brutal equation. Average working income after taxes and inflation is around $6,000 a month. Rent for a decent one-bedroom or even a tolerable unit outside the center hovers at about $4,000. Add transport, utilities, internet, and basic survival costs, and you're left with something like $800 in unavoidable expenses if you're lucky and disciplined. Then health insurance arrives like a tax on breathing. Mandatory coverage with high deductibles, another $500, so you're left with roughly $700 for the entire month, $23 a day. In a city where a coffee costs 8, where a sandwich costs 15, where medicine and clothing and small joys don't get discounted for being broke. This is where people break the truth to themselves, not out loud, in their heads. They tell themselves they're doing fine. They tell themselves it's temporary. They tell themselves other people have it worse. They tell themselves they'll get out once they get a raise, once they find a better job, once the timing changes. But the body knows before the mind admits it. People start forgetting appointments. People start skipping meals and then calling it dieting. People start taking shorter showers because water bills feel like judgment. People start praying for stable credit limits, like a number on a screen can protect a family from despair. And when enough people reach that point, the mind stops craving luxury and starts craving control. The hidden self stops wanting to feel special. It wants to feel safe. That's why anger becomes organized. It's not random. It's a survival response. Mamdani is not a mysterious messiah. He is a match held near a powder keg that was already there. A leader who understands what the system ignores. When workers are squeezed, the question isn't whether they'll complain. The question is whether they'll finally stop performing obedience. He becomes a symbol for something the hidden self always knows but refuses to voice. The economy was built to extract from you, not to include you. Now here's the second truth, darker and more personal. Most people don't understand how class power works because they've been trained to confuse politeness with safety. The elite don't need to attack you directly. They just need you to accept their narrative. They laugh at Mamdani, they call him names, they treat him like a joke, like he's a local character with big talk. The newspapers and pundits frame him as a troublemaker. The investors in Midtown think money will crush him because money crushes so many things. Money crushes rent, money crushes hope, money crushes options, but they misunderstood the trigger. They assumed his movement would be fed by money. They assumed he would negotiate like them, quietly, behind closed doors, with favors and donations. They didn't understand that his coalition is made of people who have already lost something. When you've already been thrown out of stability, you don't need to be convinced with promises. You need to be given a target. You need permission to stop lying to yourself. Mamdani's style matters because it's psychologically adaptive. He doesn't present himself like an insulated academic. He speaks like someone who has eaten fear for breakfast. He talks in the language of people who drive taxis, people who wait for shifts, people who learn the route to work as if it's the only way to stay alive. And then he did something most political figures never do. He made policy feel like a continuation of daily dignity. He didn't just argue in the abstract. He focused on basic biological needs, food, housing, health. Because freedom that doesn't keep you warm is just branding. Democracy that doesn't stop you from freezing is just a slogan. People know this, even when they pretend they don't. So when he challenges the landlords, it's not a philosophical debate for his followers. It's the difference between staying in the apartment you can't afford to lose and being evicted in winter. When he challenges food inflation, it isn't theory. It's whether a child gets eggs or only water and hope. When he challenges the cost of transit, it isn't government spending. It's whether someone can get to a job without losing half their paycheck to fares and delays. This is where the hidden self becomes obvious. You can trace the transformation of society by watching what people stop tolerating. At first, they tolerate high prices. Then they tolerate fewer meals. Then they tolerate taking on debt. Then they tolerate exhaustion. Then they tolerate fear. Then, one day, the fear changes shape. It stops being private and becomes public. And when public fear becomes public action, the system's real weakness is revealed. The system isn't afraid of arguments, it's afraid of refusal. Landlords scream about unconstitutionality when someone limits rent. They scream because they treat housing like property first and people never. They treat human lives like revenue streams. But Mamdani's playbook isn't chaos. It's strategy. The city becomes a competitor to private extraction. That's important. It changes the bargaining dynamics. Instead of waiting for the market to fix itself, the government acts like a counterforce with its own supply chain and leverage. He pushes comprehensive rent control with a ceiling tied to local average income. Then he uses land expropriation aggressively, targeting empty office buildings left behind by the remote work era. He doesn't just talk about housing shortages. He seizes abandoned capacity and converts it into cheap units. This isn't utopian fantasy. It's the ruthless logic of supply. If private landlords won't provide affordable housing, then the city builds. If private grocery prices inflate because they can, then the city creates a parallel channel. He opens public grocery stores that buy directly from producers outside the city, cutting out the middle layers that exist to monetize desperation. He reduces a basic staple like eggs by a massive margin compared to the world food retail price. And once that happens, something predictable kicks in. Corporations can't keep overcharging people without consequences. Competition from public alternatives forces them to respond. Now, listen carefully. This isn't about whether you like Mamdani's politics. This is about whether you understand the psychological truth behind what he does. He weaponizes the fact that scarcity is not natural. Scarcity is engineered. If you want to keep workers compliant, you don't need to starve everyone at once. You just need to make survival feel constantly precarious. You make every month a negotiation. You make every paycheck a cliff. Then people stop thinking about long-term rights. They start thinking about short-term survival. That's when the hidden self learns helplessness. You don't call it helplessness. You call it realism. You say, this is just how the world works. Mamdani refuses that realism. He turns it into a challenge. And that's why the elite don't just fear his policies. They fear his efficiency. They fear his ability to translate pain into leverage. A lot of viewers will ask, is this socialism? Is it capitalism? Is it both? Who cares what it's called, honestly? The deeper truth is this. When people feel their survival depends on one power structure, they become easy to manipulate. When you create alternatives, manipulation gets harder. So the third truth isn't about money or policy. It's about the internal stories people tell to stay down. You can see it in how Americans talk about taxes. The rich promote a narrative where cutting taxes for wealthy people is portrayed as benevolence. They sell it as investment, as growth, as the system will trickle down. But the trickle never arrives for the people who are already bleeding. In 2025, money doesn't trickle. It evaporates into hidden accounts and offshore sanctuaries. Wealth becomes self-protecting insulation, not a shared engine. Meanwhile, the working class is told to keep tightening belts like virtue is a form of payment. So Mamdani offers a different economic story that hits people where it hurts. Don't promise abstract uplift. Give direct relief that changes daily life. Cut rent burden. Reduce food inflation. Subsidize transit. Stabilize health access through policy rather than through personal luck. And when people receive that relief, they do something the elite hate because it restores agency. They spend, they consume services, they support local businesses, they participate again in normal life. That spending isn't just consumption, it's the psychological rebirth of being included. It tells the body it doesn't have to live in emergency mode. That's why his counterattack is more dangerous than it looks. The elite can survive insults, they can survive protests, they can survive even bad press, but they struggle when the working class stops living like hostages. Now consider the way Mamdani's supporters imagine him. Some call him a traitor to his class because he entered a system that protected wealthy property and then used his knowledge to break the mechanism of home seizures. That's another hidden self-truth. People are often furious, less at policy and more at betrayal. They can't stand the idea that someone understands the rules and then refuses to play them. For the privileged, betrayal threatens their worldview. Their worldview is built on control and distance. They believe the world is organized so their comfort is normal. If one insider turns against the system, then comfort stops being destiny and becomes something contingent. And when comfort becomes contingent, the brain panics. That panic turns into threats, smear campaigns, and warnings about authoritarianism. But here's what you're not supposed to ask. What do you call a system that freezes people in their suffering while calling it freedom? Do you call it freedom when you can't afford to keep your own roof? Do you call it liberty when your body is one illness away from financial ruin? Do you call it democracy when your vote changes nothing because the rules are rigged by wealth? You can't unsee this once you admit it. The real psychological conflict in 2025 isn't between parties on television. It's between two theories of what humans are. One theory says humans are labor units to be extracted until replaced. The other theory says humans are the reason any economy exists, and if the system harms them, the system must change. That's why Mamdani's rhetoric lands. It's not just populist theater. It's a reframing of purpose. He doesn't argue that the city should be nicer. He argues that the city must serve the people who built it and sustain it. He points out bluntly that the economy exists in a